We believe we freely choose what we want from life, guiding our steps based on desires that belong to us. But with a little calm observation, we realize that there is a single yardstick being used to measure almost everything that matters. Success, worth, urgency, even dignity. The mechanism that decides what counts and what gets discarded remains hidden, working day and night without anyone ever questioning it. If we don't try to understand this yardstick and reclaim other criteria for looking at our own existence, we run the risk of spending decades chasing goals that others defined for us, only to discover, at the end of the road, that the summit was never the place we actually wanted to reach. Max Horkheimer, a 20th century German philosopher, was one of the most profound minds to attempt to dismantle this yardstick. Not to destroy it, but to show how it was built, who it serves, and what it has been costing us for generations. He was born in February of 1895 in the German city of Stuttgart, into a prosperous Jewish family that owned textile factories. The path seemed laid out for him to take over his father's business and keep the wheels of industry turning. He studied business administration and worked at his father's factory, getting an up-close look at the logic of profit from the inside. But something inside him rebelled. He refused that destiny and turned to philosophy and sociology in search of a question that accounting could not answer: why entire societies, even as they grew wealthier, kept producing so many unhappy human beings. In 1930, at just 35 years old, he took over as director of the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, an academic center that brought together minds like Theodor Adorno, Herbert Marcuse, Erich Fromm, and Walter Benjamin. It was there, under his leadership, that what came to be known as critical theory was born, a way of thinking that refused to accept the world as it presents itself. This wasn't ivory tower philosophy. It was philosophy written with the daily newspapers spread out beside them, watching the factories, the movie theaters, the families, the streets. In 1933, when the authoritarian regime came to power, the institute was shut down. Horkheimer, persecuted for his heritage and for being a critical thinker, fled Germany. He passed through Geneva and Paris before settling in the United States, first in New York, then in Los Angeles. It was there, in sunny California, just a few miles from the Hollywood studios, that he wrote, together with Adorno, the work that would mark the 20th century, Dialectic of Enlightenment, published in 1944 and revised in 1947. That same year, he would publish on his own an even more direct and cutting book, Eclipse of Reason. Anyone who picks up Horkheimer today needs to understand that they are not dealing with some decorative name from the history of philosophy. They are dealing with someone who watched the European continent, regarded as the peak of rational civilization, collapse into ruin. He watched the most sophisticated thinking serve the most primitive barbarism. He watched ordinary citizens read the morning paper and go about their routines while their neighbors were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night. Instead of simply lamenting, he spent decades investigating how it was possible. His answer is still unsettling today because it doesn't point to some distant villain. It points to something that lives inside each one of us, in the way we have learned to think, desire, and relate to one another. During his exile in America, he and his colleagues had a revealing experience. They had left a Germany seized by open totalitarianism, with propaganda in the streets and the state's grip on the population in plain view. They arrived in a free country with abundant store windows and colorful advertisements everywhere they looked. They expected to find the opposite of what they had left behind. They found another form of the same problem. It was no longer the state telling the individual what to think. It was the market. On both sides of the Atlantic, genuine individuality was at risk. It was in this daily contact with American society, especially in Los Angeles, that Horkheimer realized advanced capitalism could be just as efficient at shaping consciousness as any authoritarian regime, and perhaps more so, precisely because it did so in the name of individual freedom. No one was forced to buy anything, and yet, by the millions, people bought and desired the same things. How, without a direct order, without a central command, did millions arrive at the same choices? That question runs through almost everything he wrote. His diagnosis travels across time as if it had been written yesterday. When you read pages of Eclipse of Reason written in 1947, you feel an immediate strangeness. It's as if he is describing your feed and your routine. He described the algorithm before there was an algorithm. He described burnout before that word existed. He described the emptiness of infinite entertainment before streaming platforms existed. The question he asks is simple and devastating. Why, in a world where we produce more wealth and more technology than any previous generation, do people feel more and more tired and directionless? Why has leisure become disguised work, with apps counting our steps and monitoring our sleep? Why has even love come to be tracked on spreadsheets in terms of emotional return on investment? The answer has a technical name, but the concept is simple. He called it instrumental reason. Understanding that expression is the key to seeing everything else. Instrumental reason means this: our capacity to think, which for centuries tried to answer the question of what is worth doing, was reduced to a single function: figuring out the most efficient way to get what we have already decided we want. Reason stopped choosing ends and started only calculating means. It became a tool. And a tool, by definition, doesn't ask what it's being used for. It simply serves whoever is holding it. Think of a knife. It's useful for slicing bread and carving meat. It's also useful for hurting someone. The knife has no opinion about any of that. It's just efficient. The problem is that human intelligence, according to Horkheimer, has been reduced to the same level. We learned to ask how, but we stopped asking what for. Engineers calculate the cheapest structure. Companies calculate the most sellable product. Couples calculate the best time to have children, so it won't interfere with their savings. In none of these calculations does the question of meaning ever appear. Meaning was outsourced to the market, and the market has only one answer: whatever pays the most. Instrumental reason presents itself as neutral. It claims to take no sides, only to serve. It looks like freedom. But by refusing to discuss ends, it ends up serving, in practice, the ends of those who already have the power to impose their desires. Whoever controls the market sets the destination. Most people, without realizing it, spend their lives calculating how to reach destinations that others chose for them. The neutrality of instrumental reason is, deep down, the most profound form of taking sides, because it protects precisely those who benefit from the absence of questions about ends. Horkheimer makes a distinction that's worth its weight in gold. He distinguishes between two types of reason. Objective reason, inherited from classical Greek and medieval philosophy, was the kind that concerned itself with thinking about what was just and what was true in itself, regardless of who used that knowledge. Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, all belonged to that tradition. For them, reason had a public function: to discover the order of the world and help human beings live in accordance with it. The central question wasn't how to get more, but how to live well. Subjective reason, which took hold in modern times, abandoned that mission. It became private, technical. For it, there is no longer any objective good to be discovered. There are only personal preferences. Each person wants what they want, and reason's only job is to help them get whatever they chose without judging the choice. If someone wants to pile up billions while others go hungry, modern reason has nothing to say about it because it gave up the right to evaluate ends. It only calculates means. The result of that turn is catastrophic, though silent. Since reason stopped discussing what is worthwhile, a vacuum was left behind, and every vacuum gets filled. That vacuum was taken over by the one value that needs no justification: money. If someone says they want to be a millionaire, nobody asks them to explain. The sentence stands on its own. But if someone says they want to dedicate their life to studying ancient grammar or writing poems nobody will ever read, a line of questions immediately forms. What for? Does that make money? Is there a future in that? Anything that doesn't pay off has to justify itself. Whatever pays off doesn't need any justification. That asymmetry reveals something deep. In a society without objective reason, money became the default meaning, the end that makes every other end debatable. It doesn't need to explain what it's for, because by definition, it's for getting anything else. It's the universal means, and in the absence of ends, the universal means takes the place of the end. That's what happened to our civilization. Money, which used to be a tool for a good life, became a substitute for the good life itself. And anyone who dares to point this out comes across as naive, childish, as if there was something more to want. Dialectic of Enlightenment, written alongside Adorno, changed how the 20th century understood itself. The book was written during the Second World War, in exile, watching American industrial capitalism settle into place on the other side of the Atlantic. The central thesis is painful. The Enlightenment, that historic 18th century project that promised to free humanity from superstition through reason and science, ended up producing a new myth, one that's harder to spot precisely because it presents itself as rational. The idea was simple and beautiful. Step out of the darkness. Get to know nature through observation. Build a society governed by reason and not by blind tradition. That promise drove Descartes, Newton, Voltaire, and Kant. And in many ways, the promise was kept. Diseases were defeated, distances were shortened, machines replaced brutal labor. Only, somewhere along the way, something flipped inside out. Horkheimer and Adorno show that reason, by devoting itself exclusively to dominating nature, started treating everything as an object to be dominated, including the human being itself. The scientist measures the atom, the manager measures the worker, the algorithm measures the user. Everyone has become a thing to be optimized. And whoever does the measuring ends up being measured too, because they live in a society where they themselves are a cog in the same system. The promised liberation has been transformed into a new, sophisticated, anesthetizing form of servitude. Servitude to efficiency. Servitude to an invisible god called the market that no one has ever seen, that no one ever chose, but that everyone obeys. It's as if the human being had built a giant machine to serve him and then, at some point, forgot the password. The machine kept on running, only now he serves it. Its schedule sets when he wakes up and when he rests. Its rhythm sets what he eats and what he dreams about. And when, in a quiet moment late at night, he tries to remember who he was before becoming a part, he finds a void. It's the blue light of the feed in the darkness of the bedroom. After a day of working so hard, there wasn't even any energy left to figure out what he wanted beyond that. That emptiness is not an accident. It's a product, and there is an entire industry in charge of taking care of it. Horkheimer and Adorno gave that industry a name that stuck: the culture industry. Cinema, television, radio, popular music, magazines, and today streaming platforms and social networks. All of it operates according to the same logic as a factory. There are tested formulas. Research departments measure audience reactions. Screenwriters are trained to produce the perfect hook in the first few seconds. Editors know the exact tempo to keep the brain from drifting. Everything is calculated to generate quick pleasure and keep thought from kicking in. You think you're choosing what to watch, but you're only choosing among options that were manufactured for you. Algorithms analyze your fingers, pausing a few milliseconds longer on a video, and the next day serve you 5 more like it. You pick from a lineup already assembled by machines that know your exhaustion better than your own mother does. And when you pick, you feel like you're exercising freedom. Horkheimer would call this the most perfect form of control. The kind where the controlled person feels free because the cage has been shaped to fit their desires. The worst part isn't that the entertainment is bad. Plenty of shows are well made. Plenty of films are technically flawless. The problem, according to Horkheimer, is the social function that all of it performs. Worn out by work that empties him, the person turns to entertainment to make it through another day. The entertainment relaxes him, numbs him, hands him back the next morning to the same work. Culture has become rest so that the gears can keep turning. Instead of waking the spirit, it puts it to sleep. Instead of lifting the soul, it tunes it to the frequency of consumption. And the most subtle part is that the contract is honest. The culture industry delivers exactly what it promises. While the person consumes that relief, he stops asking why he needs it every single night. Out of this industry also comes one of the hardest illusions to spot: false individuality. You are encouraged to be unique, to express yourself, to show your personality. But all of that happens within prefabricated shelves. There are style tribes and behavioral profiles ready to be adopted. You pick yours, and you feel special. Millions of other people made the exact same choice. Performed differences, today, the most uniformly sold product of the modern age. Each person believes themselves to be an exception inside the same industrial mold, and proof of authenticity comes with a price tag attached. Horkheimer shows that this prefabricated individuality is not a simple side effect. It is necessary to the system. Because if you feel unique, you'll buy products to express that uniqueness. And the only way to express uniqueness in a world of masses is by buying. Buying a rare pair of sneakers. Buying a different kind of trip. Buying an identity. Subjectivity has become a catalogue, and the catalogue gets refreshed every season, so you never finish becoming yourself. The self has become an eternal project of consumption, and a project that ends doesn't sell anymore. That's why it never ends. For anyone who wants to stop being just a part and start thinking with time on their hands, there's a path described in the first pinned comment. There's a recent, enormous example that makes all of this visible on a planetary scale. The great global sporting events like a World Cup. Billions of people at the same moment direct their emotion, their time, and their money toward a few weeks of games. The delivery rider stopped at a red light checking the score on his phone. The neighbor who bought a brand new jersey after 4 years of never wearing the old one. You feel like you're living through something unique and collective, and the feeling is genuine. But the schedule and the sponsorships were drawn up somewhere else, by interests that no one in the stadium knows up close. Behind the emotion, there's a structure. Brands pay fortunes to be associated with that joy. Countries compete for host status by calculating tourism revenue. Athletes turn into assets traded for sums no ordinary worker could put together in 10 lifetimes. And the fan, in the end, leaves the stadium or the screen with a sense of meaning that seemed to be missing before. For a few weeks, he knew why he was getting up early. For a few weeks, life felt bigger than the spreadsheet of his salary. That's the telling detail. Horkheimer wouldn't say that sport is bad, or that being a fan is dumb alienation. He would say something more unsettling. The emotional intensity of those weeks shows the size of the emptiness that exists in the rest of the year. People are starving for collective meaning and for something worth caring about. And that hunger, instead of looking for answers in civic life and in deep culture, only finds the spectacle organized by the industry, which delivers emotion on a fixed timeline with an expiration date. When it's over, life goes back to exactly the way it was. The earlier emptiness wasn't resolved. It was only paused. And the next event is already being scheduled. It's a society that has learned to produce meaning the way it produces soda, in cans, through marketing campaigns, with an expiration date. You drink it down fast, you feel a momentary effect, you throw the packaging away. Deep down, you're still thirsty. That mechanism repeats itself on a smaller scale every single day. The launch of a new phone, the premiere of a new series, the sale at a huge store. Each micro-event creates a small burst of euphoria, and together they form the emotional calendar of the modern individual, a corridor of events with no plot. At the heart of all this is work, and here, Horkheimer is especially harsh. In a society moved only by money, work loses its human dimension and becomes pure merchandise. The person sells hours of their own life. It's the smell of reheated coffee on Monday morning. It's the key turning in the lock at 10 at night. It's the email answered on the couch while the family is having dinner. All of that is life being charged in installments that nobody noticed signing up for. Karl Marx had already described this phenomenon in the 19th century, in his concept of alienation, and Horkheimer picks up that description, updating it for today's office worker and content creator. Alienation happens when the worker doesn't recognize himself in the result of his own work. The factory worker in an older plant produced screws all day long, but he would never see the entire machine those screws were going to be assembled into. The financial analyst today processes spreadsheets all day without understanding what strategic decision those spreadsheets are feeding into. The programmer writes snippets of code from a giant system they will never see running as a whole. Modern work is, to a large extent, executing fragments with no horizon. And executing fragments with no horizon produces a devastating psychological effect. The person starts to feel interchangeable and replaceable, because literally they are. They could get sick and someone else would take their seat tomorrow. They could die and the system would absorb the absence in 2 weeks. Instead of feeling like part of something larger, they feel like a piece in something even they don't fully understand. Contemporary studies in the sociology of work confirm, on a global scale, what Horkheimer already sensed. Research conducted by Gallup in countries around the world shows that the overwhelming majority of workers worldwide describe themselves as disengaged from what they do. It doesn't mean they're outraged. It means something more serious. They're indifferent. They put in their hours and they leave, without all that time spent at work having left any positive inner mark. Anthropologists like David Graeber, in books like Bullshit Jobs, have described the explosion of jobs that nobody needs, but that exist because the structure of the market needs them. Millions of people in well-lit offices secretly knowing that their work changes nothing. And they keep at it anyway, because they need the paycheck, because the alternative seems worse. But the hollowing out of work is just the beginning. There's something far more disturbing operating just above it, a silent structure that decides the fate of billions, without anyone having their hands on the wheel. In a few minutes, we'll get to that structure, and what it reveals is more disturbing than any bad boss could ever be. For now, it's enough to say that all over the world, the search for work with purpose and for causes with identity is exploding. People are trying to reverse the emptying out. Others are discovering that the language of purpose has become just another product, sold by companies that figured out young people don't just want a salary anymore. They want meaning too. And so they offer purpose as a corporate benefit, right alongside the health plan. The emptiness the system created has become a market niche inside that same system. This process of turning everything into a commodity invades places that once seemed off limits: friendship and affection, family relationships. Horkheimer points out in Eclipse of Reason that feelings that don't justify themselves through usefulness start to look irrational, and so, little by little, they are abandoned. Notice how you've been taught to evaluate your relationships. There's the friend who's worth your time. There's the friend who isn't. There's family who adds value. There's family who drains you. There's a get-together that produces networking. There's a get-together that's just a waste. The language of the market crept into the language of the heart, and most people didn't even notice. There is, of course, a legitimate reason for choosing who you spend your time with. Nobody is obligated to stay in toxic or manipulative relationships, but that's not the issue. The issue is when the logic of return on investment becomes the default standard. When you start looking at friendship as a portfolio, marriage as a commercial contract whose performance has to outdo the alternatives on the emotional market, and your child as a project whose return is measured in academic and professional achievements. That way of looking turns the other person into a means, and anyone who is looked at as a means feels it, not in words, but in the body. The person being treated as utility is never at peace, always afraid of the moment they will stop being profitable. And constant performance destroys any chance of a real encounter, which requires putting calculation on pause for a while. Horkheimer describes this with a melancholy coldness. He sees that technological civilization has produced human beings who are increasingly incapable of acts done for their own sake. Everything has to serve some purpose. And when everything serves a purpose, nothing is valuable in itself, including the person themselves. The modern subject relates to himself the same way the system relates to him, as a resource to be optimized. That's why there's so much personal productivity, so much biohacking, so many meditation apps calculating minutes of peace. The consequence is that even rest has become a task. Even sleep has become a goal. Even self-care has become measurable discipline. The human being no longer has a single space in life where he simply gets to be without having to perform. And when someone dares to claim such a space, he feels guilty, as if resting without optimizing were a moral failure. It's the phone vibrating in the middle of family dinner, the email blinking through the weekend, The notification that invades the bedroom at 11 at night and demands an answer before sleep. The system knows, before you do, that your attention has a price. Around all of this, what Horkheimer and his colleagues called the administered world has grown. A discrete term for a gigantic reality. A society in which everything is planned, measured, monitored, optimized, but in which no one, anywhere, actually decides where the whole thing is heading. Huge bureaucracies run flawlessly. Companies have metrics for every inch of an employee. Universities have metrics for every word a researcher writes. Each part works. The whole thing is absurd. Countries spend more on weapons than on healthcare. Wealth is piled up in a few hands, while the line of people without housing keeps growing. Data on every citizen gets stockpiled with no collective human project behind it. The global sense of direction has vanished, because it was never actually thought through. Instrumental reason doesn't think about the whole, it just manages fragments. The individual, in the middle of all this, feels like a cog. And he's not fooling himself. He literally is a part of a machine that nobody is piloting. The businessman thinks he decides, but he decides within the limits set by the global market. The politician thinks he governs, but he governs within the limits set by public opinion shaped by algorithms. The consumer thinks he defines what he wants, but what he wants was cultivated in marketing labs. So there's a strange collective loneliness. Everyone feels like they're being moved by something they don't control, but nobody can quite put their finger on who's in charge. There's no concrete villain, no identifiable dictator. Power has dissolved into the workings of things, and the workings have become naturalized. Whenever anyone asks why things are the way they are, the standard answer is a phrase Horkheimer may have foreseen better than anyone. It's the system, it's the market, that's just the way it is. Zygmunt Bauman, a sociologist who carried on a conversation with the Frankfurt tradition decades later, described this condition with the expression liquid modernity. Nothing is solid anymore. Jobs change function every couple of years. Relationships start and end at a pace that barely allows for memory. Anyone who tries to plant their feet in something discovers that everything around them is shifting, and there is nowhere to stop, because stopping means falling behind. That constant movement, which looks like freedom, is, at its core, another kind of prison. A prison without bars, where the prisoner is forced to run all the time just to stay where he already is. That's just the way it is the contemporary form of resignation. It's the moment critical thinking shuts off. It's the point where people accept their fate as if it were nature itself. And it's also the point where critical theory begins to breathe, because critical theory is, above all else, the mental habit of refusing to swallow that's just the way it is. The piece that holds all of this up is education. Horkheimer devoted many pages to the way human formation got transformed into training. Classical education, inherited from the Greek tradition, had a name that has practically disappeared: paideia. It was a slow, integral process aimed at forming the complete human being, capable of thinking and acting autonomously. It wasn't preparation for a position. It was preparation for a life. Modern education, under the logic of the market, has become something else. It has become competency training, courses for certifications, metrics for employability. American universities calculate the net present value of every diploma. From an early age, children learn that studying serves to pass tests, and passing tests serves to get into good colleges, and good colleges serve to land good jobs, and good jobs serve to make money that serves no purpose anyone can clearly explain. The question about the meaning of education has disappeared from education itself. Today, when someone studies something that seems useless, like classical literature or philosophy, they get a pitying look. Are you going to work in that field? Are you going to make money doing that? That question ends the conversation. Knowledge that doesn't pay off looks like an indulgence. And knowledge that pays off doesn't need to make any sense. Top universities in the United States, according to studies like those of Andrew Delbanco, author of College, What It Was, Is, and Should Be, have been watching the humanities empty out. History, literature, philosophy, comparative religion courses have fewer and fewer students. Entire programs are being shut down. The justification is always economic. There's no demand. The market doesn't absorb it. The consequence is a generation trained to solve increasingly sophisticated technical problems with no mental framework to ask whether those problems are worth solving in the first place. Horkheimer wrote with a clarity that hurts that anyone who only learns to be useful never learns to ask why he is being useful and to whom. And that is the key to understanding how entire societies can be steered in terrible directions. It isn't necessary for everyone to agree with the destination. It's enough for no one to ask where things are going. It's enough that everyone is busy executing tasks and optimizing processes. The rest takes care of itself. That hollowing out also hits art and culture. What for centuries served to shake people up and make them think has turned into decoration and investment. Historic paintings have become financial assets locked away in Freeport vaults in Geneva and Singapore, gaining value like stocks far from the public eye. Classical music has become the soundtrack for luxury car commercials. Novels that changed the course of human history have been condensed into 15-minute summaries in short videos. This isn't nostalgia. Horkheimer's point is more subtle. He laments that art has lost its function of negating the given reality. Great art has always had, to some degree, the power to show that the world could be different. A novel by Dostoevsky puts the reader face to face with moral dilemmas that everyday life hides. A painting by Caravaggio forces the eye to stop in front of something the street wouldn't allow you to stop for. A symphony by Mahler carries feeling through regions that small talk in an elevator will never reach. Art, in its highest form, is a pause that opens up space for a different way of being alive. Under the culture industry, that function has been anesthetized. Art has been repackaged to confirm reality, not to question it. Motivational music to make you more productive. Films that end with the protagonist reconciling with the system that was oppressing him. Self-help books that teach you to suffer more elegantly. All of it is culture. But it's culture that performs the opposite function of classical paideia. Instead of elevating, it rearranges. Instead of liberating, it adapts. So what's left for someone who sees this? Thinking critically. But that's exactly where another problem lies. In a society where everything is measured by effectiveness, thinking critically looks like a waste of time. Anyone who asks questions is seen as unproductive or out of place. You've probably noticed it in conversations with co-workers, how a deeper observation about the meaning of things is usually met with awkward silence, followed by a joke that changes the subject. Critical thinking has become a social discomfort, and social discomfort gets punished by the invisible machine of collective approval. Horkheimer warns about a dangerous point. This contempt for reflection is not a harmless detail. It is the ground in which great manipulations grow. Societies that stop thinking don't stay neutral. They become available to any force that shows up offering ready-made answers. Available to any figure who promises to give them back the meaning that everyday life has taken away. The history of the 20th century showed, brutally, what happens when masses that are technically educated but existentially hollowed out come across leaders who offer certainty. It wasn't a barbaric people that bought into totalitarianism in Europe. It was a cultured and refined people, with opera, universities, and literature. It was a people who, precisely because they had lost objective reason, became available to the first powerful idea that came along promising greatness and purpose. Horkheimer saw it with his own eyes, and he never forgot what he learned. The mechanism is still active today, in different forms. All over the world, you can see the growth of movements that offer ready-made identities and absolute certainties. The hollowed-out individual, with no inner purpose, looks for meaning outside himself, in public figures, in online groups that tell him who he is and who he should line up against. Existential emptiness is the raw material for every mass movement. The problem isn't the desire to belong, which is human and legitimate. It's the speed with which that desire turns into manipulation when the inner ground is empty. Someone who knows himself and knows what he values out of his own conviction is harder to manipulate. Someone who has never thought about any of this hands his mind over to whoever shows up first. That is the quiet service critical theory tries to provide. It's not a closed system of answers. It's not an ideology. It's a stance, a mental discipline. In traditional and critical theory, his 1937 essay, Horkheimer, draws an essential distinction. Traditional theory, in the style of the natural sciences, observes the world as it is and tries to describe it neutrally. Critical theory refuses that neutrality. It starts from the premise that the world as it is has a history and has interests behind it. Accepting the real as given is, in many cases, perpetuating it. Whenever something is presented as natural, as obvious, as the way it has always been, as that's the market, as that's life, critical theory says, stop, think. Who benefits from this seeming natural? What story is being forgotten when someone says, that's just the way it is? What alternatives are being made invisible by the apparent normality of the real? That attitude is not cynicism or adolescent rebellion. It's an adult form of intellectual honesty, and it is incredibly practical. When you read a news story, instead of just soaking it in, ask who benefits from you believing it. When you feel the urge to buy something, ask where that urge came from and who planted it. When you find yourself comparing your life to someone else's, ask who profits from you feeling inadequate. That mental habit, kept up patiently, builds muscle. And someone who builds that muscle gradually feels the air get cleaner because they stop breathing in speeches without filtering them. Horkheimer knew that diagnosis without a proposal turns into a lament, and he was not a thinker of lamentation. Throughout his work, especially in his later writings, he points toward a way out. It isn't a way out that is revolutionary in the loud sense of the word. It's an inner exit, slow and patient, that can, over time, produce collective effects. It's a way out that begins with a word that has been practically banished from modern language: contemplation. To contemplate, in the classical sense, is to look without the goal of using. It is to stand in front of something, or someone, or an idea, without any rush to turn it into a tool. It is reading a book without immediately asking what you're going to do with that reading. It is having a conversation with someone without calculating what that conversation yields. To contemplate is to give time. And to give time is, today, the most subversive act possible, because the system survives by stealing time. Hannah Arendt, a contemporary of Horkheimer and exile of the same generation, wrote in The Human Condition about the gradual disappearance of the contemplative life in modern societies. For the ancient Greeks, contemplation was considered the highest form of human activity, superior even to political action. The modern age inverted that hierarchy. Whoever contemplates is seen as idle. Whoever produces is seen as worthy. The complete inversion turned an entire civilization into compulsive producers, incapable of simply being. Reclaiming contemplation, in that context, isn't a luxury for people with time on their hands. It's a vital necessity for anyone who wants to remain human. Horkheimer sees that giving human life back its capacity for contemplation is, in itself, an act of resistance, not because it changes the system immediately, but because it produces, within the person, a region the system doesn't control. Whoever contemplates, even if only for half an hour a day, creates within themselves a space of sovereignty, and whoever has an inner space of sovereignty becomes less dependent on the offerings of meaning manufactured by others. They become harder to manipulate. They become more capable of setting their own ends. Along with contemplation, he points to the recovery of the ability to think, not thinking as performance, nor as a sellable product, thinking as an intimate, slow, repeated practice, taking up a question and returning to it in no rush to reach a conclusion. Talking with a few friends about something real, letting the conversation move forward without a stopwatch, reading old books that demand patience and reward those who have it. These are gestures that look small. They are not. They are the bricks of a life that finds its center again. Horkheimer also insists on something simple and demanding: defining your own ends. In a society where the only end the system offers is money, choosing other ends is, by itself, an act of freedom. It could be studying a field that doesn't pay, It could be cultivating a relationship that doesn't add to your resume. It could be doing a smaller job for greater meaning, or having less stuff to have more inner room. It doesn't mean renouncing money because nobody lives on air. The point isn't mystical. The point is to stop treating money as the end that justifies your life, and to start treating it again as a means to a life that itself needs to be defined. Without that definition, more money only multiplies the confusion. That's why so many wealthy people report, in interviews and biographies, a sense of deep emptiness after achieving everything they thought would be enough. Achievement satisfies desires. Meaning is something else, and it has to be built. This process of defining your own ends runs through uncomfortable questions. Why do I work where I work? Did I choose it, or was I pushed into it? What would I do if money weren't a problem? What questions do I avoid because they would change everything? These questions have no quick answer. But the simple act of asking them is already a crack in the autopilot. There's a line in Eclipse of Reason worth holding on to. Horkheimer writes that the challenge of our time is to resist the complete transformation of the human being into a means. To resist, in this case, doesn't mean putting up barricades. It means, at the deepest level, holding inside yourself a region of life in which the human being is treated as an end, not as a means. Holding inside yourself a space where the other person, too, is treated as an end. That space can be small. It can be an hour a day, or one conversation a week, or one book a month. But if it exists, it is the seed of another possible life. This isn't a heroic proposal. It doesn't demand dropping everything, moving to another country, or giving up your income. It demands waking up to the simple fact that life has a direction, and nobody is going to choose that direction for you. The system offers a very efficient autopilot. Whoever doesn't switch off that autopilot lives the pilot's life. Whoever switches it off, even just for a moment, discovers that there is still someone behind the wheel. Horkheimer doesn't leave us with only a diagnosis. He leaves us with a map. Modern reason, by reducing itself to calculation, opened up a vacuum that money took over as the only acceptable end. And, sheltered inside that vacuum, the culture industry made sure the emptiness would feel comfortable, numbing free time with pleasures that demand no thought. Work, education, bonds, art, all of it was being absorbed by the same logic that measures and disregards. The result is hollow individuals, ready to be filled by any force offering a ready-made meaning. And the way out he points to isn't in the streets, but in a calm and patient reconquest inside each of us. Reading Horkheimer is not an exercise in pessimism. It's an exercise in lucidity. And lucidity, today, is the rarest good of all. Most people spin through their day between tasks and screens, never realizing they are being spun. Anyone who stops for half an hour, with a book, with a walk without headphones, with one honest question, is already outside the machinery, even if they still have to keep meeting obligations inside of it. What he offers, in the end, is a way of remaining a human being in a world that has learned to operate very well without needing human beings. It's the silent refusal to accept that the only valid question is how much it pays. It's the return to asking what for. And that question, kept alive inside of you, is a small light. But it's the only light there is when everything else only lights up for commercial interests. If this content made you stop and think, leave your like, subscribe to the channel to keep up with the next videos about thinkers who still have something to say to us, and consider joining our members club. Until our next meeting.